Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Look how many people are still here. I think that shows the value of this conference.
Greetings, everybody. Greetings, everybody. Thank you very much for turning up this evening for the National Association of Black Supplementary Schools Week 2014, Health, Nutrition and Medicine. We've had some fantastic events so far. Monday morning we had raw food, full house, mega event. We had some great tastings, so many questions. I had to throw people out. Come on. We had the next session in the evening of Dementia UK, which wasn't so well attended, but the information was wicked and essential. Dementia is growing to the point where it will double in the black community within the next 25 years. And the question to ask is, who's going to look after our people? How are we going to look after? What is our involvement? And where's the money going to come from to look after ourselves? Because what the government's doing now is, they're taking your house to pay for your care. Now, if you own property, they're compulsory to take that property and pay for your care. You don't want to pay for it yourself. And then the issue of family squabbles and the will, probates, all that's got to be dealt with. Somebody suffering mental illness who hasn't got any capacity to make the correct decisions, it becomes messy. These things need to be discussed in the community and as early as possible before this kind of thing kicks in. So it's important that we had that conversation, and I wish more people came out, but it's being filmed and it'll be on YouTube, but we do need more of our people to attend these events. Not everything's about singing and dancing and having a great time. We need to get some serious information. So this evening is about Black mental health in the UK, and we have Matilda from Black Mental Health UK. Just a bit of housekeeping, no fire alarms drills are scheduled this evening, so if the fire alarm goes off, come out this entrance and go out the main entrance and onto the field over there. Toilets, out this door, turn right, and then turn left. You see a sign that says toilets, so turn right out here, and then turn left, and there's toilets down there. So please be interactive, ask as many questions as you like. And I'd like to introduce Matilda from Black Mental Health UK. And then she'll do some update as to what's going on with black mental health in the black community. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for choosing to attend this workshop, because I know time is precious, and I appreciate you investing time to find out more about this subject matter. The title of the talk is Mental Health in the BME Community. And if you can just press on the next slide. So I'm going to be talking about that. My name is Matilda McCatcher, and I sit up to the UK, coming up to 8 years now. Next slide, please. Black Mental UK is a human rights campaigns group. We see the issue of mental health as it affects the UK's African Caribbean communities, not through the lens of health and social care. This is how the government looks at this issue. This is how the government decides policy on this issue. It's also how local authorities decide policy on this issue, but we don't see it through that lens. We see the overrepresentation of black people who come in contact with the system as a human rights issue and actually a social injustice. Next slide, please. And so Black Mental Health UK, that's the URL of our website. Next page, please. And that's a screen grab of our website. There's some stories like our campaign, expert opinions. We've got a campaign that's been running since last year against blackness in custody, and I'll expand more about that when I speak. There's a story there that's quite old now on Leon's Law. I don't know if you heard earlier this year, the Met are now trialling body-worn cameras, and Hogan Howe has announced that the rollout is due to the fact that they want to catch more criminals, but the genesis of body-worn cameras on police officers was actually the fact that people are dying in custody. And Leon's support network and family went to their MP, who wrote to the Home Secretary and asked for the police to wear body-worn cameras, so there's an independent record of what happens when people come in contact with the police, because there's so many deaths. Next slide, please. Black Mental UK, as well as having a website, we also have an online magazine. Next slide, please. And we've had quite a number of these magazines published. You saw Chimiri Nama, I think, in the video we watched earlier. He is the UK's first black coroner. He became the first black coroner in 2010, which is really late to think that for somebody to have such a senior position, because the coronary system is the oldest part of the judicial system in this country, but he was a mental health lawyer as well as a pharmacologist, and he did an amazing amount of work advocating and supporting campaigns groups like Black Mental Health UK when the law was changing. This was in 2006, 2007, and so we put them on the front cover because The solution's all about positive images and positive messages when it comes to our communities on this issue. Next slide, please. We're government to grassroots, and so we do a lot of campaigning and frontline staff, but each edition is endorsed by government ministers. So Paul Burstow, who's a former care services minister, the minister responsible for mental health, endorsed this issue. Next slide, please. That's a front cover of another edition where we focused, and this was for Black History Month, on one of the things that is quite critical to the experience of African Caribbeans when they come in contact with the service, and that's sadly blackness in custody. And these are the faces and names of people who are physically healthy that Black Mental Health UK is committed to ensure that no one is allowed to forget until justice is done in their name. Next slide, please. Lord Toby Harris was tasked by the MOJ, Ministry of Justice, the Department of Health and the Home Office to chair a panel on deaths in custody because it's now such a concern. Campaigning has gone on for so long, the government realises there needs to be a committed focus on this issue. And so he endorsed this edition. And so this edition went across 3 government departments as well as across the community, which means the things we're saying here can't be ignored. Because if you just say it and you don't have, say, government endorsement, not that we need people to endorse what we say, we don't need endorsement of truth, but it means that people in arenas that would want to ignore what we say can't afford to, because if the minister asks about the question, they need to be informed. Next slide, please. I think an important thing about this edition is there is a generational legacy to the injustices faced by an individual in any system. And Orville Blackwood, who you can see holding convoy there, his son is Nathan John, and the legacy of those left behind is not narrated. Sean Rigg is a case you probably all know about. I was fortunate enough to meet his son at the 5th anniversary of death in Brixton. And what we don't have is a space and a place for people who were affected by this personally to talk about it. There's Lee Lawrence, Cherry Groce's son, and I know that you all know about the inquest that was held earlier this year into his mother's shooting, which led to her premature death. So he spoke about the impact of losing a loved one at the hands of the state. Nathan John, this was the first time he publicly spoke about it, and I urge you to read even the back editions of the Solution magazine, because this is not the sort of information you're going to find anywhere else. Next slide, please. So this is an edition with Michael Aboda. He publishes a power list. It's an annual list, and it publishes the leading lights in our community, like Ibrahim Say, billionaires, people who are doing really well. And I think it's very important for people who see this magazine to see that it's not just us being detained in the systems. We are doing for self, and we're doing very well. Next slide, please. This was could you go back one, please? The forward for this was the former chief executive of the NHS, Sir David Nicholson, which is another coup, because this is a man who has influence and power, and I don't know if you remember Norman Lamb speaking about parity of esteem. So mental health having the same sort of esteem as, or status, resources, etc., as physical health. And so having the chief executive of the NHS even acknowledging the issue of our communities and then having to speak specifically on it sends a message and raises the status of an issue that Black Mental Health UK believe to be of critical importance to this nation. Next slide, please. We also did an edition on the DNA database. We were the only organisation to campaign to get innocent DNA off the criminal database. That was, I think, a 2-year campaign. That just gives percentages. And this is like, say, government figures. Who knows? These are Conservative figures of the numbers of people being aware of whose DNA was being harvested and put on this database. Really serious consequences, because anyone on the database can't get a job. Anyone on the database, their status is that of a criminal. 77% of young black men were on this database. I don't know how a quarter of our children were on this database, but they were on the database. And 42% of adult men. The fact there's something called familial tracing, which means that you can be traced through a loved one's DNA, means that everyone who has a relative would be on the database, because if 77% of young black men are on the database, you're on the database. But anyway, we campaigned to have innocent DNA taken off, and the interesting thing was, the majority of black people on that system were innocent. Next slide, please. And we had James Brockenshire, who then became the Home Office Minister responsible for the DNA database, and in opposition, he committed to deleting innocent DNA. Miracles do happen. This politician kept his promise and deleted innocent DNA from the database. So it shows us, I think, that campaigning does work, because we had an online position on this. Next slide, please. This is a cover with Dorian Wilson, who is a leader in diversity. Next slide. And this was endorsed by the Communities Minister. Next slide. Yeah, we did a double-page feature on the rig case, which I'm sure you're all aware of, because it's just mainstreamed this issue once again. Next slide. And this is our latest one. Another one's due out in the autumn. And this is Laurier 2013. Now, I don't know how many people knew this, but he was voted by his peers the most talented and erudite professional in his trade. This is a black man. This is the sort of thing that people who black mental health campaigns set up to serve don't see. This is the sort of thing that dispels the stereotypes we're getting every day. Next slide, please. Endorsed by Norman Lamb, who you saw in the video, because we had a conference in 2013 and he was a keynote speaker. Oh yes, and Leslie Thomas was also the QC for Sean Rigg and Mark Duggan. So, and there's a double-page spread on his career, which is very interesting. He started working in this area of inquests, and he would go to different parts of the country without, they call them bundles. He wasn't briefed, and he'd be in a room, and he says it in the double-page feature that he gave us, and it's an exclusive, so I recommend you read it, how he would be in a courtroom opposite maybe 6 or 7 barristers who all had bundles, and he didn't, with a very hostile coroner, and he would get an unlawful killing verdict. That's who we are. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I've been asked to talk about mental health in the BME community. Next slide, please. But Black Mental Health UK's mandate and raison d'etre is the diaspora on these shores. Our focus and our priority will always and exclusively be black-skinned, melanated African Caribbeans. And there are many reasons for that. It's the one group who continue to be overrepresented in the system. It's the one group who face the largest injustices. And so whenever I'm asked to speak, I always make that clear from the outset. And I appreciate the BME banner, but that's not the reason Black Mental Health exists. Next slide, please. And I'm sure you all know about this. This is a Ghanaian proverb, and of course, like ancient, this is where all knowledge comes from. You know it comes from the continent. And this very wise bird, Sankofa or Sankofa, is a symbol of wisdom. Looking back to the past, learning in order to build for the future. And so now I'm going to take you on a journey. It might not be very comfortable, but it's very important we know these things in order to ensure that they're not repeated again. Next slide, please. So a brief history. Next slide, please. David Olawale. I don't know if you know about him, but there was a book published called Nationality, and excuse my language here, WOG. And the reason that was the title of the book is because he was arrested by 3 officers in Leeds, and where it had ethnicity, they crossed it out and put WOG. His story is, he came to this country from, and he saw England as another mother country, to study engineering. He wanted to be a professional, to go back home and, you know, like, build a good life. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to complete his studies, got into an altercation, goodness knows how, and ended up in the criminal justice system. And then from there was transferred to the mental health system. I'm sorry, this is not very pleasant. But in the book about his life, he talks about the antipsychotics and the medicine he was given being so strong, he was hallucinating and seeing things he'd never seen before. Anyway, he was released, and this is quite a common thing, as I learned about it recently in the 21st century, in the 2000s now, where people who are in the system and they're released, because they've been in the system for so long, they lose their home. David Olawale had no place to go apart from the streets. Every evening, Kitchener, Hitchin and another officer would bully him, beat him, abuse him, and urinate on him, and his body was dragged out of the river Wear in Leeds. Now, the reason this case is very important is the only case, and note the year, that officers who were found guilty of the death of somebody actually served a custodial sentence. This was for affray and I think GBH, not for murder, because his body was dragged out of the weir, and the reason he served a sentence is because other officers heard the bullies boasting about killing him in the locker room. And that's how the truth came out. And so for Black Mental Health UK, we don't care if it's Sean Rigg in 2008 or David Olawale in 1969. It's the same thing for us. In this case, it's important because he cannot be the only person whose life people are found culpable when they're taking the life of an innocent person. Next slide, please. David Orville Blackwood, who you've already seen, and Nathan John when he was a baby. Now, Orville Blackwood's a very interesting case. Next slide, please. Because he was in a hospital. He was in a hospital. Now, my perception and understanding of a place of care is that it's where you're safe. But anyway, I learned recently that in this hospital he was required to work and he was not feeling very well and so went to lie down in his cell, because it's Broadmoor. He was lying down in his cell where 6 officers, or the nurses, prison staff, prison warders, I don't know what word you describe them, they went in and they forcibly restrained him. They didn't release him until Orville Blackwood passed away. Next slide, please. Now there was a report, but it's quite interesting because Orville Blackwood died the same as other black men. And so there was Orville Blackwood, there was Michael Martin and Joseph Watts. So this is not an isolated incident. And his mother campaigned long and hard and forced a public inquiry after going to Europe for justice for her son. And so there was an inquiry, and the title of the inquiry was Big, Black and Dangerous. That's how these people in this system view people that they're paid to care for. Now, this is very uncomfortable, and my question has always been, if they are so dangerous, why is it that this group are coming out in body bags? But it's important to know, because this report is seminal, and if Orville Blackwood's mother, who's Nathan John's grandmother, who I had the honour of meeting, and he emailed me because of the work I was doing, and it's incredible when you do this and you see these faces, and it becomes more real when you see the human beings affected by it. And it's important that we remember this, and it's important to know that we're standing on the shoulders of giants. A lot of work has been done to ensure that this does not remain silent. Next slide, please. And so there were many recommendations. Training the use of control and restraint. Monitoring patterns of diagnosis of schizophrenia in African Caribbeans. Staff members to tackle racism in hospitals. Clear procedures for advising relatives of the death of patients. And you wouldn't think this would have to be a recommendation after somebody died, but I was astounded to hear how subsequent families have been treated when a loved one has lost their lives. Next slide, please. And so, Orville Blackwood, 1991. One would have hoped the lessons had been learnt. Ibrahim Say lived in South London. He wasn't feeling very well, and so called the police for help. He was taken to a police station. I won't go into the details of what they did because it's just off the scale. But this picture's here because there's a generational legacy. Not only, they're talking about fatherhood and the importance of family. This child had her father until she came in contact with the police. Next slide, please. Model Sylvester, 1999. Found, apparently, outside his own front door, begging to get in naked. His family have told me that that's not the whole story. He died in 1999 when the police picked him up and restrained him in, I think it's a hospital in Hackney. I don't know why, but he's no longer with us. Next slide, please. David Bennett. David Bennett is my introduction to this issue. I had no idea that this was an issue affecting people from African Caribbean communities. I had no idea there was a different kind of treatment. I was told there's a public inquiry into the death of somebody who uses mental health service. I thought, me? Mental health? Marie Claire, because I was a journalist at the time, maybe. Mental health, I don't think so. But I went, next slide, please. And, yeah, David Burnett, he was a musician. who was a revolving door patient, entered the system at 19. And there was a dispute over the hospital phone. He was racially abused. The staff restrained him and didn't bother to try and resuscitate him. Next slide. Oh, no, just pause. Then phoned his family and said, David, he had breathing difficulties. This is on the Friday, because he was in a secure setting, but he could be allowed out at weekends. That's very kind. They said, right, David, he had breathing difficulties. Technically not a lie, because if you're going to sit on somebody until they stop breathing, they will have breathing difficulties. We rushed him to hospital. That wasn't true. He died. That was true. 3 years later at the inquest, next slide please, Dr. Johanna Bennett, there she is. She was a nurse who retrained in pharmacology in order to help her brother, because she was told her brother was untreatable. She said, my brother's not untreatable. When she got the call to say, your brother's died, she said it wasn't natural causes. She campaigned. Just like Orville Blackwood's mother, she took her placard and she went to the street. Just like the Riggs, she wasn't silent. And that's why we have, next slide please, the David Bennett Inquiry Report. Sounds like deja vu, because we've been here before. So that bird and that symbol that's ancient is a message for us today. Because I believe the ancestors have a message for us in every generation. And we're going to use that message to do right by our generation and the future generations. Anyway, recommendations from this report. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. Also, a bit like deja vu, because didn't we see recommendations on restraint? I think it was a decade earlier, that had they been implemented, we wouldn't be seeing this. Anyway, now the recommendation for the David Bennett Inquiry Report was a 3-minute rule. So don't restrain somebody for more than 3 minutes. Surely in a health setting, that is doable. Why do you have to restrain somebody at all? Monitoring patterns of diagnosis for African Caribbeans, further research on the diagnosis of schizophrenia. That's deja vu. Training on resuscitation techniques. I don't understand how, if you say you're a health professional, if somebody has difficulty breathing, I don't see, even if you weren't a health professional, I don't see why this should have to be flagged up. But anyway, we now have it for the 2nd decade in black and white. So hopefully we're going to see a change here. And tackle racism in hospitals, national lead on race equality, etc., etc. Oh, ministerial acknowledgement of institutional racism. That was a war, but hey, no, that was a battle, but the war's not over, so we will get victory. Next slide, please. And so, from the David Bennett Inquiry Report, the government responded, and this is a former government. We saw one of the ministers in the video earlier, the Shadow Health Minister, Andy Burnham, and his party was in power.